So to start out with, what is the plant kit? We can see from this image here, this is kind of that little GIF we have. So the idea is that you have this moisture fidget, you have some sensors, and at the end of the day, you should be able to automatically water your plant. So you should be able to create a smart watering system for your plants. Your student should be able to create a smart water system for their plants. And just like every other kit that we have, this works on Windows, Mac OS, and Raspberry Pi. So the Raspberry Pi especially is interesting for this kit. So if you do have a Raspberry Pi in your classroom, they usually look like this. This is a newer model, but if you do have a Pi in your classroom or your school, this is a really good project to make use of the Raspberry Pi because this is something that you really want to eventually, after you figured out all your code, you really would like this thing to just be sitting in the corner, maybe hooked up to a few plants or maybe just one plant and just kind of doing its thing, watering the plant, logging some data and doing that. And you could do that all semester. You could do that for a week. You could do that for as long as you'd like. So that's really one of the extensions that we'll be talking about today. That's pretty cool. And just like all of our other kits, this is offered in Python, Java, C#, and Swift. So just like you would expect from all of our kits. So taking a look at what actually comes inside of your plant kit when you get it. This is the general overview of everything. So as usual, you'll get all of the cables that you need, all of the accessories, and we're going to be taking a quick look at the actual sensors that you'll be getting in this kit. So to start off, the main sensor for this kit is the moisture fidget. So this sensor looks something like this. So this is what you'll receive in your kit. So hopefully you're able to see that. But essentially, it is a kind of this. There's prongs on this fidget, and it works just like any other sensor where you have your fidget cable. So if I take a fidget cable, I can plug it into my sensor like that, and I would plug this end into the vid tub. So just like any sensor that you've worked with, and the idea with this sensor is that you're actually able to measure the amount of moisture in your plant. So you'd stick this in your plant, and it would tell you how much moisture is actually in there. So in the course, we have students take multiple measurements, so they have an idea of the range that they're expecting. But that's the general idea with this sensor. And things to note for this sensor, one really nice thing about this is it is capacitive. So if you've seen other sensors like this in the past, you may notice that they have metal exposed on these prongs. And essentially what happens when you put that in your plant and you let it run for a while is it will just almost instantly corrode and give you, your data will just be wildly inaccurate. So this one's really nice because it's capacitive. You can just stick it in there and it'll be safe for a long time. And then the other thing to note is if you are using this with students, try to make sure that when they actually have it in their plant, that they're not covering the whole sensor with the soil. Maybe just keep it below the little connector there. That's one thing to note that I would do. If they do, submerge it fully, that's fine. It's not going to kill the sensor immediately or anything like that. So that's the first sensor, and this one's also a pretty cool sensor just in general. So say you're done the plant kit and you want to maybe use this in a different application. So you could use this as like a water detecting sensor as well. So say you had some advanced students who they're interested in maybe sending a text message when like a flood alert sensor or something like that, they could use this in a project like that, which would be pretty cool. So that's the first sensor there. The second sensor is the light sensor. So this is one of the basic sensors that comes in our bundles. So that one looks like this right here. And essentially the idea is that in the course, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but most plant species will expect a certain range of light. So some may prefer to be in really shady environments and some may prefer direct sunlight. And essentially with this kit, we've mapped those different light levels out for students, and they'll be able to say, hey, my plant is getting good light for the type of plant it is, or it's not getting enough light, and they can make adjustments based on that. Another main piece to this project is the tubing and the pump. So the pump looks like that, this one right here. So you can see it up in the corner here. And what that looks like is this. So this is a submersible pump. It's a 5-volt pump. And essentially it comes with about 20 inches of tubing that looks like this. So the idea, we'll see this in the instructions, but the idea is that the students will take their tubing, they'll connect it to the pump like this. So they'll have this set up like that, and they'll essentially just submerge this in water, and then they'll be controlling power to the pump with this fidget right here. So this is a DC power source, 5-volt fidget. So it's a mouthful, but essentially what that lets you do is it lets students really easily control power to their pump. So if you're familiar with the Getting Started kit, we had the LEDs on the Getting Started kit, the ones right here. And essentially how we controlled those was with a digital output object. So we said, hey, the state, we basically had a state and we set the state to true when we wanted the LED to turn on, and we set it to false when we wanted the LED to turn off. And you control this sensor the exact same way. So when you want the pump to turn on, you set the state to true. When you want it to turn off, you set the state to false. So it's a really, really easy fidget to use. And it's really nice for their programs because they can just really simply turn the pump on or off. And we'll show you that in a little bit here. So those are the main components, I guess, just to look back here. So those are the main fidgets that you're going to get in your kit. So again, you get the moisture fidget, you get the power source, which runs your pump, and then you get a light sensor so that you can actually figure out what's happening in the environment. And again, you get all of the cables that you need. And then we actually use these clips here to attach the pump to the tubing to the plant. So we'll show you that in a little bit here too. So just like we're always used to, we do have the fully online course. So I'll put the link in the chat here. So if you navigate to that link, you'll be brought to this page here, which is the Phidget Plant Kit online tutorial. So essentially, this functions, if you've seen the rover kit, this is a very similar project page to that. You can access it also from going to the Learn tab and then going to the Projects tab. So Learn, Projects, and that will bring you to our projects page here. And then you can scroll down and you can find the plant kit. So that's how you access this page here. And essentially there's two parts here. So there's the initial project, which shows students how to assemble the kit, how to code against all the sensors, everything they need to know to get up and running. And then we have the extensions down here. So right now there's the single extension, but expect more coming in the future. And the one that we have, the first one that we have here is that Raspberry Pi extension. So it shows them everything they need to get up and running with the Pi and the plant. So just to take a look at the initial project here, we'll open that up. And what we can see here is the same setup that we see, familiar setup to the Getting Started kit. If you've used it, or if you've used the rover kit, a similar setup to that. But essentially they have their navigation on the left-hand side here, and they have all of their kind of key points that they'll be learning. So, in this project, the goal is to have them learn about the moisture fidget, the water pump, and the light fidget. So once they understand how to use all of those sensors, then they finally kind of finish with designing their system. So let's just take a look at the course here. So as usual, we navigate the course by going to the bottom and clicking the kind of backward and forward buttons here. So the parts we already covered. The one thing to note is that the hub, so every Phidgets project, we know this requires a hub. So the hub is going to come from the Getting Started kit here. So generally, teachers will start with a classroom set of Getting Started kits, and they'll add on projects. So this kit assumes that you have a classroom set of Getting Started kits so that you are able to use the hub from those kits. The other things to note is, of course, you'll need a plant to monitor. You'll need a water reservoir. So here we just show this little glass here, but ideally in a classroom setting, you'll probably want some kind of a Tupperware with a lid so that water's not spilling everywhere. And then the other thing to note is that you're going to want a secondary reservoir. So that could be a cup, a water bottle, whatever. And the idea is that when students are testing their pump setup, so when they are kind of experimenting with how this pump works, you'll want a place for the water to go into so that you're not flooding your plant and killing your plants before you even get a chance to set up the system. So that's the parts there. The assembly, pretty quick. It should only take 5 or 10 minutes. So as we mentioned before, you're just simply adding the tubing to the pump there. You're connecting the pump to the 5-volt power source. So the screwdriver is included in the kit. So pretty simple there. And then you're attaching your hose or your tube to your plant. So that's where that clip comes into play, and the elastics. And then again, this is the water pump just sits in the reservoir. So you'll have a reservoir. Again, you probably want to use some type of a Tupperware or something with a lid. And then everything kind of just sits around the plant, and that's what your basic setup looks like. So the moisture fidget goes into the plant, and again, you want to keep that connector fairly high up out of the plant so that it's not getting shorted out every time they run the pump. So the first step to the project is using the moisture fidget. So what we have, I'm going to set this up on my desk. So again, the moisture fidget looks like this. And all they're doing is in the kit itself, it tells them what ports to connect to, but I'm just going to connect it to my hub on one of the ports here like this. And then I'm going to plug this into my computer just so that we can see what the data looks like. So I have this on my desk there. So essentially, just like we always do, we provide the base code for them. So I'm going to copy this code here, and I'm going to open up Thonny, and I'll paste that in there. So this is what the code for these the moisture sensor looks like. So just like we've seen with all of our other sensors, the difference here that you may not have seen is the voltage ratio input class. So that might be you've probably used digital outputs, digital inputs, maybe a light sensor, something like that. So this is just another class, and essentially it's a ratio. It's called a voltage ratio input because the data coming from the sensor is going to be it's going to be between 0 and 1. So we'll see this here if I run this code. So my sensor right now is just sitting in kind of open air here, and I'm getting about 0.118. So in the course, if we just navigate back there, they're actually one of the tasks they have to do is collect this data. So they're going to collect in air, in dry soil, and in water. So they're going to collect those 3 data points so that when they write their software, they have some idea of what values they can expect and when they should be activating their pump. So here, for example, in air, my sensor is 0.12. And then I have a cup of water here. So I have this water here. And then if I open this up again, make that larger. So if I dip my moisture sensor in water, we can see that that goes up. Let's see if I dip it more. We can see that goes up to nearly 1. So that is going to tell us that, if our plant is really fully watered, it's probably going to be around a 1. And then again, they're going to have a dry soil value so that they can tell, hey, maybe when it's dry, it's around 0.3, 0.4, something like that. So essentially, they're just creating this range so that when they design their system, they have an understanding of what they can expect from their moisture sensor. And again, this is how, if you wanted to take this sensor out and use it in a different application later, it's pretty simple. That value is, close to 0 when it's dry. And again, if I dip that in, it gets up to 1. So you can imagine creating a little, like a flood sensor or something like that using this sensor, which is cool. So that is the first section of their course. They're going to learn how to use the moisture sensor. So they're going to get their code and they're going to collect their values. The next step is for them to use their water pump. So I'm going to plug this in as well. So I'm going to swap out my moisture fidget for my water pump. I'll throw this on my desk here. And essentially, this is where we're using that reservoir. So you can see that we've taken the tube out of the plant and we've put it in a secondary reservoir right now for testing. And again, a warning, things may get wet. So of course, they're going to be using this. Maybe try to avoid, maybe, I don't know, maybe minimize the amount of water they're using or something. We'll leave that up to you guys. But this is kind of the fun part where it gets a little bit messy. But essentially, they have the code for the pump. So we'll take a look at this code a little bit more closely so that everyone can see what it looks like. But as I mentioned before, it's very, very similar to, it's actually the exact same as our LED code. So the pump functions as a digital output. So they're creating a digital output. They're addressing it. So just like we address the LEDs, they're saying, hey, this is the hub port my pumps or my power source fidget is on, and it's a hub port device. So right now I actually connected mine to port 3, so I'll change that. They open their pump just like normal, and then they use it. So here we're setting the state to true. So that line right here will turn that DC power source fidget on. So it'll provide 5 volts on the output, which will turn on the pump. So here we're sleeping for 1 second, and then we're turning the pump off. So let's just put this to 5 here, and then we'll run this. So hopefully you can hear that, kind of hear that pump going on. But if I had this submerged in water here, so if I had that hooked up to the water there, and you probably can't see this very well at least, but if I had that hooked up to water and I pressed run, we will see water start pouring out there into the kit, or into the glass there. So the idea here is that, okay, now they understand how this pump works. And the next step, again, is to collect some values because they're going to be designing their system later. So, how much water after 1 second of the pumping on is output? How much water after 2 seconds, after 3 seconds? The idea is to, again, based on the type of plant they're using, they're going to have to do some research. They're going to have to look at, hey, I have this type of plant, it needs this much water. And then they can figure out, okay, that means that my pump should be running, if my plant's dry, it should be running for 5 seconds to provide adequate water. So it's kind of a fun little part there because they can learn how to use the pump, but they're also collecting some values. They're going to have to measure how much volume is coming out. So it's kind of a fun little part there. So once they've done that, they move on to using their light fidget. And again, we've seen this before, but if you haven't, I'll plug this in here and give us all an idea of what it should look like. But essentially, the light fidget will determine how much light your plant is getting, of course. And again, we have their code. So I'll copy that code. I'll paste it in here. And again, it's the same as any other sensor code. So it's a light sensor. We open it and we get data. So if I run this code here, let's make sure that my thing is actually connected here. Let's see, let's try that. There we go. So there's my light data. So in this room, we have this value, 330 lux. And again, we've seen this before, but if I cover this with my hand, that will go down to near 0. And lux, they're going to have to look up, they're going to have to try to identify what type of plant they have and how much lux they actually need. So here's this how much light section. So it says, hey, if you have we basically separated it into 3 different types of plants. And usually this is what you'll see when you go to the store and buy plants. It's a low light plant, medium light, or full light. And then based on that, they can take a look at their lux and decide if their plant is getting enough light or not. So it's kind of a cool way for them to experiment and say, hey, okay, this thing is never, they can, what they can do is they can log the data. Say you have this thing deployed with the Raspberry Pi, have them log the data for a day or 2 days or whatever, and then go back and look at the light values and say, okay, what's the maximum amount of lux our plant got? What's the average? And make sure that, if it's not enough, that maybe we change the position of the plant, or maybe we need to incorporate a grow light or something like that. So it's a pretty cool, it's a project-based learning thing. It's real life. You have to look at it and see. You have to look at the data and determine if it's actually enough or if it's not enough. So pretty cool stuff. So again, they'll have to do some research. They'll have to look at their plant, go online, find how much lux it needs, all that kind of things, all that kind of stuff. So after they figured out their light values, the last step to the plant kit is designing their system. So they're going to take all this information that they've gathered and put it together to make a final system. So again, when they're testing out their system, they're going to want to use that reservoir to make sure that they're not accidentally watering their plant too much, because at this point they're putting together their light sensor, they're putting together their moisture fidget and their pump. So it's going to be the first time they actually test everything out. And as usual, we give them the code, of course, but the idea here is, okay, now you have this code that opens all the sensors that you need. So we'll just take a look at this quickly. But essentially, we have this piece of code here for them. So it opens all 3 sensors here. So the soil, the pump, the light sensor. It addresses it, it opens it. And right now it just kind of spits out the value that they're getting. So it tells them what their moisture level is. It tells them what the luminance is. But now it's kind of up to them to actually modify their system and make a control system, essentially, that is looking at the moisture, determining if the plant needs water or not. And if it does need water, turning on the pump. So there's a lot of cool things that they'll run into here. So we have a little guide for them. So, make sure that they know the light level they should be expecting. So output to the user if the light is, good enough, not good enough, things like that. Same with the moisture. So if the moisture status is, if the plant's dry, it needs to output that it needs water. And same with the light. So all this stuff is basically just in the testing phase still, because now they're incorporating all the sensors. And then finally what they'll do is, if they have this kind of like printing system working in a way that they think is good, they can add the water pump and they can start running it with the plant. So it's a pretty fun little project there. And at the end, they should have this thing running on their desktop that is accurately watering their plant. You know, it's not watering it too much or too little. It's doing what it should do. So after they do this project, you know, you're going to have the students who they get through that and they're totally done, and that's fine. But of course, the students that are wanting the challenge, that's where you could throw them at the extension. So the extension looks like this. So again, we make use of the Raspberry Pi. We show the Raspberry Pi 4 here, but if you have like a Raspberry Pi 0 or whatever you have, that's all good. Essentially what they'll need is they'll need the plant kit, they'll need a Raspberry Pi, and then an optional part here is the LCD. So you may have an LCD in your classroom, but essentially what this will let you do is if you have the Pi kind of running in the side of your class, the LCD provides output. So it's a nice way to just say, hey, okay, this thing is still running, or it's a nice way to just check in and make sure things are doing what they need to be doing, but you definitely don't need it to complete this project. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking that same plant kit setup and now they're connecting their Vint hub to their Raspberry Pi. They're transferring their code to their Raspberry Pi. And essentially the idea is that they copy that code over. They set up a task to run the program automatically. So when this thing, you know, you remove it from your monitor, remove it from your keyboard, plug it into power, one of the first things it's going to do is run your plant kit program. That's what this section here is for. And essentially, if they want to, at that point, this thing would be sitting in the corner, watering your plant, doing what it's doing. And then if you do want, you have that option to add the graphic LCD and then have an output. So you could output the plant status. I think we actually have an image of it down here. So we have this here. So you could output the light status, the soil moisture level, and you could, you know, they can do little animations if they want, if they have time to kill. But essentially, that's the idea with that extension is you're just adding that Raspberry Pi. And again, there's so many possibilities when you add the Pi. This one doesn't actually show logging that data, but you could also do that. But yeah, that's kind of the basic setup right now for the plant kit. It's pretty cool. It's the thing I like about it is it's quite easy. So I mean, that's kind of like all Phidget's projects in general, but you connect the hardware, it doesn't take long, and then they can kind of focus on actually making this thing work, which is quite fun. And then if you have it connected to the Raspberry Pi, you could actually have this thing sitting in your classroom all year, watering your plants. And you know, they could add extensions to it. They could do the logging. They could do the grow light. I think the grow light would be really cool. If you're not familiar with the sensor I'm talking about, it is this one right here. So it's this power plug Phidget right here. So essentially you could add that to your Vint hub. You could add a grow light or maybe just a regular lamp. And essentially you could just turn on power to the plant when you need power. So that would be a very cool extension. But yeah, we again, it was just a short kind of sweet webinar of a basic introduction to the plant kit. We'll likely do one in the future where we talk about the Raspberry Pi and how you can actually get all of that going. But as always, we do appreciate everybody stopping by and taking the time to join us today. If you have questions, education@phidgets.com is the best place to do it. Or if you're joining us right now, you can always email me. But thanks everybody for stopping by, and I'll stick around for any questions that you may have.